So welcome back. We are looking at project management in this particular class. Now, if you recall from our unified modeling language, the unified process diagram that we covered last time, in the unified process there was a bunch of different disciplines down the left-hand side, and the next to last, right before the last one, which is environment, the next to last was project management. And so you might be asked, why are we covering this so early? And the plan behind that, of course, is that you are going to be doing a project. And so I think it makes a lot of sense to talk about project management here early in the process. So let's get into the content for today. So what's the idea behind project management? Well, really what it's all about is delivering things in a timely manner and meeting constraints and requirements. And another way to look at it is actually part of a triangle. It's the triangle of scope, cost, and schedule. Scope, if you remember from the other day, is what we include, and really better to sometimes defined what we exclude. What's it? Schedule was down here. Obviously that's the timeliness of getting things done. And cost was over here. So if you think about it, if we have a certain scope and we have a certain cost amount that we can spend on this, then that's pretty much going to determine our schedule. So if we've got a lot to do, a large scope, and we have tons of money to get it done, then schedule-wise we can get it done very quickly. If we have a large scope, very little money to play with, then the schedule is going to be really what the schedule needs to be, and probably will need to be spread over time so it can be done in the downtime periods. If you need to get something done very quickly, and your cost, you have to limit your cost. Well, the only way to get those two things to work together is you need to limit your scope to be very small. So those three things always work together: the cost, scope, and schedule. So as a project manager, and certainly the systems analyst who's doing project management, is going to be responsible for initiating, planning, executing, and closing down the project. So those are the four elements of any project: initiation, planning, execution, and closing down. And that's going to require a diverse set of skills. So you're going to need management, leadership, technical, conflict management, hopefully not in our teams, of course, customer relations. So you're going to need a whole diverse range of skills there when it comes to dealing with a different set of people for each part. So obviously you're going to need to be dealing with the manager who decided this project needed to be done. Leadership above them potentially, so maybe the board of directors. You're going to need to deal with programmers on the technical side. Users, programmers, board, leadership, that might all deal with some conflict management. Typically that's at the user level, people who find out things are going to change for them. And then at the end of the day, customer relationships, of course, they are the people who are going to use your new application. And so you need to be able to deal with them in a very sophisticated and useful fashion. I really like this slide. It gives the sense that a project manager is really juggling a whole bunch of things. They call it the art of project management. You've got vendors, you've got people, you need to be able to use tools well, you need to be able to manage time and resources within those times. You've got to be able to document and communicate, handle customers. You've got to be aware of technological changes that are happening. Part of this class, of course, is the SDLC. You've got to understand the aspects of that and why they're important. And you've got to be able to understand organizational change and complexity. So that's just a lot of different pieces and things and technology and people and place that you're going to need to deal with. So project management is definitely a skill. We have an entire class on that in the information systems major here. And that's why, because we need to cover everything that's on the slide. Why are we covering it in this class again? Well, we're certainly not going to go into too much depth, but we do need to make sure we can get our project complete. And so we're going to kind of brush the surface of what we can do when it comes to project management. All right, so let's drill down a little bit, and kind of mentioned it earlier, but we have the four phases of any project: initiation, planning, execution, and closing down. So let's talk about initiating the project. Well, there's 5 things that need to get done. You need to establish the project initiation team. That may be actually different from the team that gets the work done. typically on a systems analysis and design project, there's an initiation team who's responsible for that triangle of scoping, project scoping, cost and scheduling. Typically works not with the user, but with the leadership and the management of the project. And you're going to need to, as it says here, establish relationship with the customer. Often that is the users, and there's a different group from the people who are kind of leading and driving this project. So you need to establish who the users are going to be and where they are and what's going on. Then we actually have a project initiation plan. We actually plan for how we're going to get things done. We establish some management procedures. So who's in charge, who sends the reports, where they're sent, file formatting, really gets down into some really nitty-gritty stuff. And now, and as it says here on number 5, we establish a project management environment and workbook. And so when it comes for you initiating the project, obviously we've picked the team. Essentially, you're going to be the customer, or probably a friend of yours or a family member of yours is going to be the customer. Don't essentially need a plan, number 3, but what we'll need is some management procedures. So that kind of packages around how you're going to communicate between each other, what sort of document sharing facilities are you going to use. And as it says here down on the project management environment and workbook, maybe that's kind of which, are you going to be using Excel or Google Docs, Microsoft products or Google products? What sort of file naming conventions you're going to have? How are you going to let people know that you've made changes or updated something? All of those need to be nailed down just to make this a smooth running project. As I mentioned a little bit earlier, here we have planning the project. So we've initiated and now we're going to plan. So under planning the project, we need to describe the scope, alternatives, and feasibility. And so, as I said a couple of times now on scope, scope is what's included. It's the piece that we've got. I'm going to make that a circle. There you go. What's in. And really the best way to look at it often for scope is what's not included. People just seem to understand more intuitively what's being looked at if you tell them what you're not going to look at. But nonetheless, we are going to need a scope and feasibility for your project. You're going to need to define quite clearly what's going to be included, what's not, and as it says here on that second bullet, what problem is going to be addressed. So you really need to think about what your app is going to do and why, what results to be achieved, what's the outcome that we're looking for, how are you going to know this is successful. It could be it saves money, it could be it saves time, it could be that millions upon millions of people use it, it could be that it raises a lot of money, it could be that it enables, I don't know, photos to be shared more easily or videos to be edited more easily, or allows you to report a crime in progress without having to say who you are. There's just a whole bunch of measures of success. And then at the end of the day, this completion criteria down at the bottom here. How will you know when you're done? And actually, more importantly, how will the person who is sponsoring or leading or managing this project, how will they know that you are done with it? So those are, what are they, 5 of the pieces of planning the project there. And so what we're going to have you do, one of the pieces of documentation you're going to need to complete is a system service request. And here on this slide, you'll see there's a well, it's not a great example, but it is an example of a system service request. And it just basically lays out who's requesting it, which department. You can say a location where they're located. The problem statement and the service request are the 2 important parts for us, and that's the pieces that I want to make sure you really focus on. What problem are we solving, and therefore what are we asking for to solve that problem? What will our app do? How are we going to get that done? So that's the system service request, and you are going to be required to complete one of those. Okay, we're still on planning the project, and this is obviously some things that we're going to need you to get completed here in the early stages of the App Inventor project for class. Second thing we have here on planning the project is dividing the project into manageable tasks. It's called chunking, and there's 2 ways that gets done. One is a work breakdown structure, and another is something called a Gantt chart. If we move on to our next slide, you will see a classic work breakdown structure. This says it's for an electronic commerce bank project, but you can see that there's 9 phases to the project. Not a million miles off what we've talked about actually already. You can see there's initializing the project, doing the planning, which is what we're doing now, analysis, design, build, test, implement, close project, and evaluate the success of the project. Looks a lot like unified process diagram here on the left hand side, right? And there's a darn good reason for that. What this shows though is how we've drilled down into the testing side of things, and under testing there are 3 sections to that too: a plan, then you get the results, and then we have a milestone, and then as you can see in the diagram here, we've also drilled down the reporting. There's 7 things, really 6 things that lead to a milestone, the 7 that need to get done as well. This is a fabulous little chart, by the way. I would encourage you to keep a copy of this to work from. I think it's a really good chart. Moving on, the next slide shows a classic Gantt chart. Gantt was the probably German guy, maybe he was Dutch, who came up with this. But nonetheless, what you see on the left-hand side of this Gantt chart, if you zoom in on it yourself, you'll see that there's requirements, design, screen design, report design, database design. It's all the pieces that you're going to have to do to work through the task at hand. And these little blue lines off to the right-hand side of the diagram, they show when the work's going to be done. And then those arrows that go between, those are called the critical path or the path dependencies. And it shows what you have to complete before you can move on to the next step. And so we need to be able to complete the requirements before we can do the report design and the screen design, which makes perfect sense. How the heck can you have a screen without knowing what is required to do? And so that's why we have these things. You have to finish requirements before you move on to the design phase. So those are called path dependencies. And this is a Gantt chart, which gets it done. Now, this Gantt chart, I think, has been done, yes, in Microsoft Project. In the project management class, which is the 476 capstone class for us, you will be completing this, but we won't need to do anything near as fancy as this. We can actually do this, and indeed, when I worked at KPMG, I did this just in Excel, nothing fancy, but it got the job done. Another way of looking at things is this network diagram. It's the next slide along. It's the network diagram. To be honest, I haven't used these anywhere near as much in practice as I have the Gantt chart. The Gantt chart pretty much gets used for these network diagrams, less so. And what this network diagram does is just show you the interconnectivity between the different parts of the project. Just a different way of looking at things. Okay, so we're still planning our project and we're on step 5, and what we have here is a developer communication plan. So the notion here is that we need to make sure that we know how we're going to get in touch with each other. So the very first thing I had you do when we organized the teams was I had you make sure that you had everyone's cell phone numbers, that you had everyone's email addresses, that you determined whether you were going to use Google Docs, Drive, SkyDrive, how you're going to share documents. That's what goes in this communication plan, as you can see here. How are you going to get in touch with people? When? What sort of reports are you going to do? And you should make a decision around this too. Is someone going to, when something gets completed by someone, do you send an email to everyone, or do you just let people figure that out? I would suggest that anytime you work on something for the group, when you've finished and uploaded or shared the document, it would be a great idea to just send a quick email to let people know that's happened. So that's kind of a type of report and a frequency of report. And if you look at this next slide, which shows the project team communication methods, kind of lays out the many different ways that you can get things done. Might be worth you just having a quick read down this. Nothing that you need to learn, nothing complex in this list. But I think it does kind of give you a sense of how you might use one thing over another thing. Okay, so moving on, we're still planning the project. We're in 6, 7, 8, and 9. There are 10 things total. So 6, determine the project standards and procedures. Basically, some of our project standards are going to be that we're going to use App Inventor. I'm going to test things and we're going to make sure they work. There's going to be some procedures around that. Is it only going to get tested on one phone? Are we going to just test in an emulator? I don't think that's a good idea, by the way. So I would hope you're going to find access to an Android device. And if you only have a Kindle Fire, maybe you need to test it on some sort of Android phone, such as a Samsung. But again, those are all standards and procedures for how you're going to get this project done. And so you as a group need to think about how that's going to work for you. Step 7 here is identify and assess the risk. And so what really are the risk elements of this project? Typically on a project, some of them are that we won't get finished on time, we'll run out of money, we won't be able to program things exactly how we would like, the users are not going to cooperate. Now we manage a bunch of those risks purely because this is part of a group project. And so this is due, I think, week 14. So there you are, that's your deadline. Are we going to run out of money to get this done? No, because you're working for free. Are we going to be able to find some users? Are the users going to cooperate? Yes, because for the most part, most of your projects you'll be actually making an app for yourselves or for people just like you. So you can obviously use yourselves and your roommates to, as potential users for this. But nonetheless, you can identify the sources of risk and you can estimate the cons. You can think about what happens if some of these things go wrong. In step 8, in a typical project, you would create a preliminary budget. So you would work out what this would cost. Again, your time is being given for free here. But nonetheless, as a group, you are going to need to work out how much time you can dedicate. I know a lot of you have very onerous work commitments. And so as a team, you need to be able to work around that. That said, if you do have a full-time job, that doesn't mean to say that you get to offload this to the members of the group who don't have a full-time job. So you need to create a preliminary budget, and that just doesn't mean money, but it means time as well. And then this number 9 actually is a statement of work. And a statement of work is where you lay out the steps that you're going to take to complete the project. And so those are 6, 7, 8, and 9 when it comes to planning the project. And then on 10, we have a baseline project plan where we estimate the project's tasks and resources. So it's kind of just pulling everything together at the end. Actually come up with a plan for how you're going to get this done. Now remember, we're only in the planning phase at this point. So we've done the initiation and moved on to planning. And then if you look at your next slide, this is the 10 steps to actually project planning that are all pulled together in one slide. Again, I think that would be a useful slide if you made it for maybe you to print off and keep in your binder as something that you could refer back to. Okay, so we've moved on to executing the project. Remember, we initiated, then we planned, and now we're going to execute. So there are 5 parts to executing. So let's first execute the baseline project plan. Basically, that means get things done. Acquire and assign resources. We've done that. I've put you in teams. Although you may need to acquire, of course, some Android devices to get the testing done and some of the programming done. Train the new team members. That's exactly what we're doing in class with the App Inventor little things, such as the Hello Per app and some of the other ones that you're going to work on. That is training new team members. And then keeping the project on schedule. Well, that's part of my job working with you. So I'm kind of the overall project manager here for your projects. I'm going to be the one who makes sure we keep the project on schedule, that you get things done. And as I say, I've already given you the deadline. It's week 14 of class. Monitor project progress. So one of the things you'll need to do is keep track of where you're at, what's going on. And again, part of my job will be to make sure I get the deliverables from you. Part of your kind of resources and budget is how I allocate points to this project. So I have a way to kind of, as my budget for you, is the points that you get for completing this project. Any project that gets done worth its salt is nearly always going to have changes to it. No, that's the case in life. And so there's going to be slipped completion dates, changes in personnel, new things that need to get added. I think for our App Inventor projects, this is not going to be the case too much. For one, there's no slippage in completion date. It's due week 14. Changes in personnel, probably not. I think you're all signed up for the semester. Although just occasionally someone needs to drop. So that would change the personnel, or really you just lose some personnel. And new activities, well, we're going to work very hard right in the beginning on keeping the scope, on finding out and figuring out what the scope is for this project and what we're not going to do, and we're not going to change that pretty much if we can throughout the semester. Step 4 in executing the project is maintaining a project workbook. That's a lot of the deliverables I'm going to ask for in class. They're going to basically be you maintaining this project workbook. And then step 5 out of 5 for executing the project is communicating the project status. Well, that's your submissions to me in class, and it's my kind of my report back to you is done 1 with points and 2 with meeting with you as a team. So those are the 5 steps of executing the project. All right, so the 4th and final part of what we're going to look at least for this part of the class, we had initialization, planning, execution. Now we're going to close things down. And so as it says here, we have terminating the project. Kind of like this. We have natural termination, which means I got things done just as I said I would. And then there's unnatural termination, which is when a project just gets stopped. That's not going to happen for us. We need to finish the documentation. We need to appraise the people who've been on the project. And so in any decent systems analysis and design project that's run by professionals, there will be an appraisal of the personnel who've been on the project. That's how you get pay raises or you get fired. So obviously that's a piece of what needs to get done. There's going to be post. So moving on to the next slide. There's going to be post-project reviews. That helps us kind of see where the strengths and weaknesses of the project, the people, the processes, the technology. That's just a really useful thing to do. So we can see what we can do better or what we did really well. We can leverage that across future projects. And then at the end of the day, we send the final bill and say thank you very much. And usually go out for a drink with the client to celebrate the storming success of our project. Okay, so a huge part of getting a project done well comes down to really the Gantt chart and a little bit the network diagrams. This is important enough that we're going to work through one actually, and I'm going to show you exactly how these things work. So as it says here, this is Gantt charts and network diagrams for scheduling, representing and scheduling a project. And the Gantt chart, it's kind of interesting. It says useful for depicting simple projects or parts of a large project. Well, I happen to be on the Visa Y2K project where they needed to get everything Y2K compliant. My recollection is they had, 10 people working full-time just managing the Gantt charts for this project. So, it's useful for depicting enormous projects as well. Anyway, end of the day, it shows the start and completion dates for individual tasks. So you know when things are supposed to start and when they're supposed to finish. The network diagram, on the other hand, shows the ordering of things. Those are different things, and there's different things that you might want to see. So back again, and you've seen this slide before, this is a classic Gantt chart, and it shows the start and end, and it shows what you have to complete before you can start the next thing. And then the network diagram, which I've also shown you already, that shows the ordering of things, and so you can quickly look, and I say it's just a different way of looking at the same information. So what's the difference between a Gantt chart and a network diagram? Well, this slide does a little bit to explain it, but basically a Gantt chart shows the duration of the tasks and any time and overlap between tasks. Whereas a network diagram, as we kind of said before, talks about the dependencies, what depends on what. Here it says the network diagrams visually show which task can be done in parallel. Well, I think that's pretty true of the Gantt chart, to be honest. And it also says the network diagram shows slack time. Well, so does the Gantt chart. So just a different way of presenting the same data. You'll see in most organizations, though, the Gantt chart is, I think, on any systems analysis and design project, 100% of the time you will see a Gantt chart. I don't know, maybe a quarter of the time you will see network diagrams as well. So looking at the next slide here, we are going to walk through a sales promotion and tracking system. So we're going to give you an example, an SPTS, sales promotion and tracking system project. I think you saw this earlier actually. It's got the kind of the steps, and they're always in the Gantt chart. On the left-hand side of the Gantt chart, it had the different activities. And as you can see here, we have requirements, collection, and then after we've done that, we can move on to screen and report design and do those both at the same time. Once we're kind of clear with what reports and what the screens are going to look like, I think we had the database design. Once we've got the database going, we can build some user documentation, get this programmed, and then install it and test it. And I have a question down here at the bottom. What would be different if we did this for our roadkill app? Is there anything different on this list for our roadkill app? So what we just did is we looked at all the steps that would be required if we were building a sales promotion tracking system. And I asked the question, what would be different if we did a roadkill app? Well, after you've identified all the activities that you're going to need to do for your app, the next thing we need to do is look for or make some estimates of how long things are going to take and what the expected time is going to be, and that's actually a calculation. So take a look at this slide. Down the left-hand side, we have the activities. We got those from thinking about what we need to do for our app. And then in the middle of this slide, you can see we have time estimates in week, and we have O, R, and B. Give you a second to think about O, R, and P, what they might be, what they might stand for. Okay, so R is realistic, O is pessimistic, and O is optimistic, and P is pessimistic. So this is the optimistic, realistic, and pessimistic estimate. And then you can see the expected time calculation is just a little bit of weighting on that. We basically have 1 of the optimistic to 4 of the realistic to 1 of the pessimistic, and we divide by 6 to get an expected time. That's just a quick calculation, as you can imagine. So that gives us the time. So we come up with these time estimates. As it says on this slide, how would you get these time estimates for the roadkill application? How would you come up with how long it takes to gather requirements? How long would you come up with how to design the screen? So some of the things you might want to think about on the requirements collection, we kind of touched on it a little bit. We have to start with looking at the legislation. That should be very easy to get. But then we're going to need to talk to some people. Maybe we need to talk to the legislator who wrote this. Maybe we need to talk to some people who voted for and against this. We're going to need to talk to the department. I think this is Fish, Wildlife and Parks. Then we're going to need to talk to some different users of this. And it might be we need to talk to the people who will need to enforce the use of this app. So we might need to talk to some Montana sheriffs. And if you think about that, that's going to take some scheduling. And that could take, the actual scheduling may take way, way longer than the meetings themselves. So, I don't know, this could easily take 3 weeks, even though we only have meetings which are 30 minutes long. Screen design, how would you think about how to get screen design done? Well, a little bit of that, of course, is how familiar you are with App Inventor. And so is there anyone on your team who's really worked through this and understands it or feels more comfortable? Same with report design. So each of these pieces, as you can imagine, you're going to need to give some thought about who's going to do it, how's it going to get done, what are some of the issues that could arise in getting them done. So there you go. That's the developing and determining time estimates and expected completion times. When it comes, you can see at the top of the next slide, when it comes to a network diagram, what we need, and actually for a Gantt chart for that matter, we're going to need to determine the sequence of activities. What comes first? What comes second? Do we have to complete the first thing first before we can start the second thing? Or can we do 1 and 2 together? Well, that's exactly what's going on in this sales promotion tracking system here. We give some thought, and that the preceding activity column is what you need to think about. we gave some thought to what must be completed before we go on to the next task. And again, I asked the question, what would be different for our roadkill application? I actually think the answer is pretty much nothing would be different on this particular case. This is a very standard way of doing things. Okay, so this slide is entitled Determining the Critical Path. And the critical path is the path through our project or through the tasks of our projects, which if we have a hiccup or anything goes wrong, then the project will take longer. So it's the longest path through the project. And if anything happens to the longest path through the project, if anything slows us down, then it's going to take even longer, and that's obviously critical to us. Now, network diagrams do a good job of helping us look at what is on the critical path, and it's really the only reason that I've personally used a network diagram is to figure out the critical path. You can totally do it off a Gantt chart, but it turns out that a network diagram actually makes it just visually quicker. And you can see from this diagram, just very quickly, the requirements collection is step one. Well, that's on the critical path, being the first task. You have to do it, and obviously if you're late in the requirements collection, everything else gets delayed. You can see from this picture that 2 and 3 we can do together. Either one of those, I guess, could be critical, as in you could slow down enough that you would push the project back, but clearly database design, absolutely critical. Everything goes through it. You slow down on that, you're going to slow down on the project. So you can get a quick visual sense of where the choke points are if you want. Bottlenecks is another way to phrase them, and in fact, if you look at this picture, it kind of looks like a bottleneck. And so that's almost where the phrase came from, to be honest. It's from these network diagrams looking just like this. And you can see that number 4 looks like the neck of a bottle. So it's a bottleneck point. And that's where some of that came from. So when it comes to commercial project, there's a wide variety of tools available. Some companies use Microsoft Project. There's a bunch of niche software out there that allows you to track all this stuff. Back to Visa on their Y2K project, they just use Microsoft Project. Nothing too fancy there. It's just out there. It's a solid product, as you can imagine. Gets things done well. My recollection is that in our project management class, we use Microsoft Project for that. So that's the commercial management software that's in there. So a really good way to check that you understand this is obviously to work a problem. And so what I have now is some problems, and then I have some answers, and we'll be separating out the problems for the answers in the links. But here's our first one. We've got right here a list of activities, the time in weeks, and the immediate predecessors, which is exactly everything you need to draw a network diagram. So why don't you just pencil and paper, nothing fancy, why don't you draw out a network diagram for these activities, and you don't need to label them, you can just number them. Put the time in weeks so you know how long each one takes to collect. Think about the predecessors, and come up with a network diagram. A little tip for the top is it's nearly always best to start at the end in the network diagram and work right to left through a network diagram, because that seems to just seems to make things a little easier for some people. So you might want to give that a try and see if that works for you. And then you can pause the video and work. So pause the video, work through this, and then once you've got your answer, unpause the video and you'll be able to see the answer that I have. Okay, so now you've got your network diagram and it looks like mine. Why don't we use the network diagram? Let's calculate the earliest expected completion time. Remember, that's the critical path through the project. So why don't you figure out, using the network diagram, what the earliest expected completion time is for this project. So I want you to pause the video, figure that out, and then once you've got your answer, you can fire the video back up and see what my answer is. Okay, so 2 tasks left for you. One is show the critical path. I think that should be pretty easy for you to do at this point. Just if you go back in the video, I actually put red boxes around the critical path, but you can just do the same thing. You can maybe highlight it in red, so you can just make sure you have the critical path. And I'll tell you what I'll do. If you pause it right now, highlight your critical path, and then I will show you what I have for my critical path. So you can highlight your critical path, pause the video, highlight yours, and then unpause, and I will show you what I have. And when you've done that, the last piece is, what if we have activity 6, as a hiccup in it? What if something happens on 6 and it were advised to take 6 weeks instead of 1 week? So figure out, if we have a problem, what happens to the entire project. And again, why don't you pause the video, figure that out, and unpause the video when you're done to see what my answer is. Okay, so the last thing that I want you to do is create the Gantt chart. You have all the information you need to get this done. You have the activities, you have the timing, you have the predecessors, so you can map this out quite easily actually. Again, if you were doing this professionally, you'd be using Microsoft Word, Microsoft Project, or whatever software your organization prefers that you use. Personally, I've used Excel when I've done this. Just to get the bars, I right-click and then use shading, so nothing very sophisticated. And then I use word art to do the arrows. All I need you to do though is you can just do this on paper using pencil. Just put the activities in a column on the left. I think the critical path is 27 weeks, so you need 27 columns after that, which I appreciate is quite a few. But nonetheless, let's map out the critical path. And so at this point, why don't you pause the video, draw out a Gantt chart, and when you've completed your Gantt chart, start the video again, and I will show you my solution. And that ends the content for the project management part of systems analysis and design.